Hey you guys, it is the lesbian Kylie Jenner speaking. I really should have worn my glasses, but I already have my contacts on because that would have really completed the look. I am not a hipster, but I am a bit gay. You're about to hear me read a very straight man story. I will just say that the author of this story, Joel Farrelly, is one of my favorite online horror story writers ever. There are some parts of his stories, though, that I would not normally read, and I'm really hoping I don't run across them this time. I wanted to kind of come from a fresh place, so I didn't reread this story, but I know that this is the first story that I read by him, and that ended up being a bit of an obsession. I love him. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know why, but I feel personally connected to this person, and I am he's on my mind sometimes, okay? And I am friends with him on Facebook because I thought that it was his author page, and now I know things about his life. And it's one of those things where, you know, me, I can kind of get obsessive about people. That is a trait of bipolar disorder. And while I have treatment for the actual mood going up and down thing, that doesn't happen to me anymore. It's great. I haven't experienced a depressive episode in almost a year. Not entirely a year, 9 months. And it was pretty fucking rough. Okay, we're going into things. I'm an obsessive person. You're learning about me in this video if you haven't already met me. I am a very obsessive person. When I like something or someone, I instantly become obsessed with it. And that's not healthy, but it is something that I do all the time. And the reason that I'm reading this to you is because I'm freaking obsessed with this guy. I don't know what it is. He just has a charismatic way of writing about horror stuff. I feel like he is his writing at least, is the epitome of what my mind would be if I actually got my shit together and wrote any horror stories. I'm not saying I would be this good, but I would tend to have the same attitude. My favorite horror movies involve a little bit of humor. Get Out is kind of interesting because it was obviously like a terrifying concept, but Jordan Peele made it, and it has a bit of a comedic edge to it as a result. And I've already talked about Train to Busan. It's one of my favorite movies. The Invitation, also very funny in certain parts because they're very self-aware in that movie, but also sense of humor, self-awareness, two great qualities to a horror movie, and two qualities that I think Joel Farrelly, as a writer, tends to manage pretty well. So this guy, he writes for Thought Catalog, is like a horror story writer, except for in the past year, he's been kind of MIA because there's been a lot of issues going on in his life. Jesus, I know too much about this person. Anyway, I'm just going to read the story, okay? Because we don't need to go into the intricate details of my mental issues, disorder, what have you, because there are also a lot of positives to becoming obsessed with something. For example, I have a lot of cool wigs now. I don't know if you've noticed that. I have a lot of cool wigs. That was an obsession, still is an obsession. I became a yoga teacher because I was obsessed with yoga. I'm looking to become a personal trainer because I'm obsessed with the idea of being a personal trainer. So these things can either motivate us to improve our lives or randomly make me obsessed with this guy who lives in New Orleans that I've never even met and who reads horror stories. And I probably don't really know anything about him personally other than through his writing. And that's why I like it, because knowing something about how someone is writing, knowing someone through their writing, that's the thing. You've kind of gotten an insight into my sexuality and my mental disorders, so I hope that this is a very politically friendly video for you if you disagree with me. Let's just read the fucking story, okay? So the story by Joel Farrelly, aforementioned. There's a shack called the Devil's Toybox in Louisiana, and people who go there supposedly lose their minds. The Devil's Toybox is an urban legend that savvier horror fans will recognize as the inspiration for the infamous Lament configuration from Clive Barker's seminal Hellraiser series, though in reality the titular Toybox is not a toy at all, but rather a small room where the floor, the ceiling, and the walls are each composed of one giant mirror. According to the legend, if you stood inside this mirror room alone for too long, supposedly the devil would show up and steal your soul. In most versions of the story, he did so by flaying you alive. I mention all of this because about 2 weeks ago, I got an email from an 18-year-old girl located in northern Louisiana who we'll call Erin. The specific town where Erin lived shall go unnamed for reasons that will soon become clear. Like a lot of places, the town where Erin lived had its own annual haunted house attraction that went up every October. The attraction was called Farmer Graves' Haunted Orchard, and in years past it had been every bit as thrilling as the name suggested, which is to say, not very. So for Halloween 2014, the owners decided to spice things up by building several new interactive installations, of which included a windowless shack called the Devil's Toybox. The shack has a small room composed of large wall-sized mirrors. That's how Erin heard it described anyway. She'd never been inside the toy box itself. Farmer Graves closed less than a week after opening that year, a result of the numerous people who'd been hospitalized after going inside the Devil's Toy Box attraction. Erin didn't get a chance to try out the Devil's Toy Box for herself before the closure, but she had heard countless stories about it from her classmates at school. Apparently, no one could last longer than 5 minutes inside the room. There was even a large timer set up beside the building that showed the current occupants' length of stay, under a second clock displaying the longest recorded time up to that point, which maxed out at 4 minutes and 37 seconds before the attraction finally closed. The man who managed to last that long, Roger Heltz, age 52, father of 3, had been reduced to a wide-eyed mute. To this day, he still hasn't said a word. One woman suffered a heart attack after just 90 seconds inside the box. A 17-year-old boy had to be dragged out, kicking and screaming. The boy was from one town over, and Erin hadn't known him, though her friend Celeste claimed her parents were friends with the boy's mom. They went to his funeral when he killed himself 2 weeks later. Whatever the truth of the matter, town officials were quick to act in getting Farmer's grave shut down, and they even somehow managed to keep the incident out of the local paper. Of course, no one could stop people in the town from spreading their own rumors about the now infamous attraction, which they began to do almost immediately. For the next month or so, it seemed like the toy box was the only thing anyone could talk about. It had become the stuff of legend, and of course it didn't take long for the local kids to start venturing out to the orchard at night to see the box for themselves. Farmer Graves' Haunted Orchard was owned by a middle-aged couple named Will and Darlene Sawyer. When the town council ordered the Sawyers to shut down, they were so pissed about the ruling, they left most of the attractions still standing, including the Devil's Toy Box. The actual orchard was on a plot of land located at the rear of the Sawyers' property and was only accessible by a narrow 2-lane dirt road. One night, several seniors at Erin's school snuck out to the Sawyers' property on a dare and claimed they found the toy box's entrance padlocked. But a certain Will Sawyer showed up out of nowhere and asked them if they wanted to go inside. Will's sudden arrival had startled the young men, but once they realized that he wasn't mad at them for trespassing and in fact seemed genuinely happy to see them, the guys decided to take him up on his offer and have a go inside the box. Of course, they chickened out as soon as Will unlocked the door, and it seemed to swing open on its own like a hungry mouth at the sight of food. That's how the rumors about midnight screenings of the Devil's Toy Box began to circulate. Most of the people who ventured out there afterwards claimed they encountered Will Sawyer after waiting beside the toy box for an unspecified length of time. A few even said that they went inside the box, but these claims were always dismissed as bullshit. No one came out of that box that was coherent enough to talk about it. Last week, Erin's boyfriend Troy went out there with some of his idiot friends, and Erin hadn't seen him since. His parents reported him as missing, and Erin even tried to tell the cops about the orchard, but they didn't seem to take her seriously. Now Erin was going crazy worrying about Troy, and of course, she was hoping I would be intrigued enough by her story to come with her to investigate Farmer Graves, because she was too scared to do it by herself. Aaron's town was only a 3-hour drive from New Orleans, so I asked my friend Jason and his girlfriend Gretchen to take the ride with me. This way I wouldn't feel so weird about driving all that way to see an 18-year-old girl I met on the internet. We rolled into town at about 5 p.m. that Saturday and met up with Erin at the McDonald's, as she called it. I laughed when I first heard her say that and immediately felt like an asshole for thinking it was funny that Aaron's town only had one McDonald's. Our meet and greet started out a little awkward on account of all the stares that we were getting from the rest of the people in the restaurant. Then again, 4 strangers driving into town to meet a teenage girl at the McDonald's will do that. Thankfully, Gretchen was there to defuse the situation with one simple question. Did you make that? She was pointing at Aaron's backpack, which was actually a stuffed doll that I recognized as a lumpy space princess from the cartoon Adventure Time. Only most of the stuffing had been removed and a purple pouch had been sewn into it that sealed closed via a matching purple zipper. The straps were made out of old retro-looking seatbelts. Aaron nodded and Gretchen's jaw dropped. Oh my God, will you make me one? Will you make me 2? Gretchen asked. Sure, as long as you provide the supplies, Aaron said, laughing. Deal. Gretchen was grinning ear to ear as she turned to face me. You have to help this girl so she can make us tiny, adorable backpacks. We all had a good laugh at this, which seemed to ease the tension. We kept on laughing too, like a bunch of idiots who had no idea just how fucked they were. It was a little after 10 p.m. when we neared the end of the narrow dirt road that led to Farmer Graves' haunted orchard. We parked beside a tall wooden archway that designated the orchard's front entrance. I handed out flashlights from the small stash of them in my trunk, and then we started inside. The place looked about how I had expected it to. A row of brightly colored plywood shacks lined the vacant field beside the several rows of satsuma trees that had been covered in fake cobwebs and scary decorations. Each shack had a sign displaying the name of a different attraction. There was Horn Toss, which, judging from the illustration on its side, was a ring toss game where you try to throw halos onto a demon's horns. Werewolf Bowling, which was anyone's guess, and my personal favorite, The Exorcist, which was a mounted squirt gun game that had several wood cutouts of Linda Blair's face as its targets. Cartoon water tanks were painted below each of the mounted squirt guns, and the tanks were labeled as holy water. The Devil's Toybox was the last shack in the row. It was painted a bright fire engine red, and the door, which made up one entire wall of the small structure, was padlocked shut. Someone had stacked a dozen or so rested folding chairs against the side of the toy box. Erin grabbed one of the chairs and began to unfold it as she said, "Now we wait." How long? Gretchen asked. It varies, but hopefully not forever. Erin motioned at the thick patch of wilderness to our left, and I turned to see a window glowing out there in the distant darkness. See it? That's the Sawyer house. They must know we're here. And that's a good thing? Gretchen's tone was tense and she had a look on her face that said she just realized how much she didn't want to be doing any of this. Before Erin or I could answer, she turned to Jason. "Baby, will you walk me back to the car?" she asked. Jason gave her an irritated look. "What? Why?" "Because all of this just got too real. You knew what we were coming out here to do. I explained to you in vivid detail." "Jason, please." "No, it's bullshit, Gretch. You do this every time." "I know. This is the fucking Dark Knight premiere all over again. I miss everything cool." "I'm sorry." She batted her eyes as she gave Jason an adorable frown Gretchen had honed over many years of getting her way. Jason let out an exasperated sigh and I handed him the keys to the car. "I'll be right back," Jason muttered. I pulled out a chair and took a seat next to Erin as we watched the beams from Jason and Gretchen's flashlight shrink off into the darkness. A thought crossed my mind just then. As if this didn't already resemble an episode of Scooby-Doo, now we're splitting up. That's just asking for it. As soon as the words crossed my mind, we heard the crunch of approaching footsteps. Erin and I stood in unison and exchanged a panicked glance before turning to face the forest bordering the orchard. A middle-aged man with long hair and a bathrobe emerged out of the darkness and into the range of our flashlights. Will Sawyer was basically Vincent Price if he had starred in The Big Lebowski. He smiled and gave us a thumbs up as he said, "You here for the box?" Sort of, Aaron responded, and Will gave her a look like he had no idea what she could possibly mean. Have you seen this guy? I held up a photo of Troy that Aaron texted to my phone as Will started to approach us. He squinted at the picture. Maybe, he said. When was that? A few weeks ago. He was the one that went in the box. Most won't go inside anymore. Lasted almost 3 minutes. Then he ran off, screaming. Aaron let out a sharp gasp. Ran off? Ran off where? She asked. Into the fucking woods. Where do you think? I opened that door and he came shooting out, dick flapping naked from the waist down. More people outside. These are paper-thin walls. Everyone can hear me do everything. Into the fucking woods. Where do you think? I opened that door and he came shooting out, dick flapping naked from the waist down. Had his boxers on his head and his pants wrapped around his neck like a scarf. It was honestly pretty funny, Will said. Erin covered her mouth with her hand as her eyes began to well with tears. Will grinned. You want to see inside? He asked. We aren't here for the box, I said, stepping in front of Erin and glaring at Will. But it's so breathtaking, the man said as he gestured toward the toy box's wide door, which slowly swung open. The interior was shrouded in darkness, but I could see something vaguely human-shaped moving inside. Yeah, fuck that. Run! I grabbed Erin by the arm and pulled her along with me as I sprinted away from the toy box. I could hear something chasing after us as we ran back toward the orchard's entrance. And I say something because it certainly didn't sound like a person. What I heard weren't footsteps, but rather one long scraping sound, accompanied by a wet breathing that reminded me of a panting dog. Thankfully, Jason heard me screaming just as he and Gretchen reached my car. They turned to spot me and Erin running towards them with identical expressions of pants-shitting terror. Jason must have caught a glimpse of the thing chasing after us too, because his face went pale. He quickly unlocked the car and threw himself behind the wheel, screaming for Gretchen to get in. She hurried into the passenger seat, and the moment she buckled her seatbelt, he started the engine and accelerated towards us, closing the gap in a matter of moments. Jason slammed on the brakes as he neared, and the car screeched to a halt inches away from us. I went to open the back passenger door, but it was locked. So was Erin's side. I banged my fist on the window and pointed down at the locking mechanism. Jason mouthed, "Oh shit!" He turned and scanned the door controls on the driver's side, looking for a master switch. The scraping sound was getting closer, but I refused to look back and banged on the window once more. A frustrated Jason finally leaned into the back seat and unlocked the door manually, but by then it already had me. I can vaguely remember someone dragging me back through the woods. I wasn't aware of much else beyond the vague impression that I had been stung by an insect with some kind of paralytic venom. I felt a rush of air hit my face as the door swung shut in front of me. Then the lights came on and I realized where I was. The Devil's Toy Box. The room's construction was actually pretty impressive. The floor was a thick sheet of plexiglass layered over a mirror, identical to the ones that made up the ceiling and walls. With the door shut, the mirror on its other side was just as seamless as the rest. Thin fluorescent bulbs ran between the crevices where each mirror met the next, washing the room in its endless reflections in a dim white light. I made the mistake of looking down at the chasm of reflections below me and almost fainted. I shut my eyes and held out my hands, feeling for the nearest wall. I leaned against it while trying to force my head to stop spinning. Someone was whispering my name. Joel. I opened my eyes to see my reflection smiling at me as it said, "You're his now." I let out a startled scream and backed away from the mirror I was leaning against. Something was moving around behind my reflection. It was hard to see what it was at first, but something was climbing through the corridor of my reflections, making its way towards me. As it got closer, I saw that the something was me. Well, not exactly. Its features were too blurred, as if this reflection of me had been so far back that its face had been reduced to a distorted mess. That was the Joel that was coming for me. I began to bang on the entrance wall, which felt padlocked into place. I let out a frustrated scream and finally turned to face the thing coming for me, only to find that my reflections had returned to normal. There was no longer a blurry Joel coming for me. I let out a reflexive sigh of relief. A beat later, it emerged from the mirror beneath me and grabbed onto my legs. I woke up screaming and Erin shot me a panicked look. We were still seated outside the toy box. Sorry, I must have nodded off, I said. Erin opened her mouth. She hesitated before saying, I'm worried about your friends. I rubbed my eyes. Why? How long have they been gone? I asked as I pulled my phone out to check the time. A while, almost 30 minutes. I guess we should go check on them, I said. As Erin and I started on the path back towards the entrance to the orchard, I nodded in the direction of the Sawyer house. You think he's going to show? I asked. Erin thought about it for a moment and nodded. I hope so. If not, I don't know what I'll do. I glanced at her, worried that Erin was about to start crying, but the look on her face was one of stoic acceptance. Realizing that I was staring at her, Erin looked up at me and we exchanged a moment of awkward eye contact. I smiled to try to play it off as I quickly faced forward. It was then that I realized we'd lost our way in the dark and had somehow ended up in the dense patch of woods that bordered the orchard. How the hell? I scanned the surrounding wilderness with my flashlight, trying to get my bearings, but I couldn't locate the orchard or any of its accompanying structures in the dark. Then, after a bit of what I thought had been backtracking, we ended up at the front steps of the Sawyer house. It was a rustic, white, 2-story, 3 if you counted its 6-foot elevated, flood-proof foundation, similar to a lot of homes in the area. The space beneath the porch was unlit and pitch black, yet, staring into it, I could have sworn I saw something moving under there. Erin gestured at the house. Guess we might as well say hi, she said. Erin started up the steps before I could even begin to mention the many ways in which that might be a bad idea. Without hesitation, she knocked on the front door. Shit, I muttered to myself as I followed her up the stairs. There was a tense beat of silence, and then from inside came the sound of footsteps across the hardwood floor. The door was suddenly yanked open, and a middle-aged woman with gray-streaked hair and the brightest blue eyes I'd ever seen was standing there glaring at us. This must have been Darlene. You here for the box? She said, glaring at both of us. I experienced a moment of intense deja vu as Erin replied, sort of. Darlene leaned outside and glanced around, looking worried. You better come in, then. Erin and I exchanged a cautious look as the woman turned and started back inside, leaving the front door open behind her. Erin responded with a shrug that said, fuck it, and then entered into the house. As I followed her in and shut the door, I heard something rustling in the bushes outside. Lock it, please. There's shit all in this woods, Darlene said. The rustling sound grew louder as I turned the deadbolt and it slid home with an ominous thunk. We followed Darlene into a den that reeked of weed as she gestured to a half-smoked blunt burning in the ashtray. Help yourself, she said, gesturing to the blunt. She took a seat on the sofa and muted the large flat-screen TV mounted to the wall in front of her. Now, how can I help? I cleared my throat and replied, we were told to expect a Will Sawyer. Is he coming? He killed himself last night, so probably not. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I said. Yeah, so how can I help you? Well, I held up my phone and showed her Troy's picture. We were wondering if you remember seeing this guy out at the orchard recently, I said. Darlene examined the photo. Not that I recall, but I never went out there much after the incident with the Toybox. It's my fault that godforsaken room got built in the first place, and every time I see the thing, I want to fucking cry, she said. Erin tilted her head, her tone curious when she asked, it was your idea to build the Devil's Toybox? Darlene slowly shook her head. No, I was sick, like really sick. And that shitty demon or whatever told him he would make me better if Willie built a room of mirrors and got people to go inside it. If your friend went in there, I can tell you one of 3 things happened. He's either dead, catatonic in a hospital, or out in those woods. The ones that end up out there, something happens to him, like when a pig gets loose and grows tusks. But if it'll help, you're welcome to look for him here. Here is in your house? Erin asked. Yeah, Darlene stood, slid her coffee table out of the way, and pulled the rug aside to reveal a crude trapdoor cut in the hardwood floor. Will brought a few of the ones that went in back home. I think he felt sorry for them. Anyway, he kept him down here. The woman pulled open the trapdoor, and I was hit with a stench that was so potent I didn't know how we didn't notice it when we were outside. It was a smell of human filth en masse. Darlene nodded at me. You got a flashlight? I returned the nod and handed it to her. She switched on the light and aimed it down at the open trapdoor, revealing the upturned faces of 4 emaciated and completely naked men. Any of them look familiar? One of the men hissed at us. There was more rustling sounds from outside, and then something began to scratch at the living room window. Darlene glanced at the window as she said, "You got them riled up tonight. How long were you two out there?" Before I could respond, a filthy hand with impossibly long fingers reached up and yanked me down through the trap door. I woke up screaming. I was sitting outside of the toy box, and Jason was seated beside me. "You okay?" "Yeah, bad dream, sorry." I was still reeling from my nightmare within a nightmare as I glanced around. Something felt off. "Where are the girls?" "What girls?" "The girls, one of them being your girlfriend, Gretchen." "Dude, Gretchen broke up with me like a month ago, remember? Or is this something you're doing for your story?" "My what?" "The story you're going to write about this. You're fudging the details, which you probably should. You gotta make up some fake reason why we're out here too. Some damsel in distress who needs you to investigate a derelict Halloween attraction. It's definitely a lot better than saying your depressed friend asked you to drive 3 hours to see some rundown shack in the middle of the night where nothing whatsoever happened and then your friend shot himself." "Oh, trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning." "What?" Jason slid the barrel of a handgun into his mouth and pulled the trigger. I was sitting close enough that the shot left my ears ringing. I stood and slowly backed away, my gaze fixed on the crater of blood and viscera that had been my friend's head mere moments ago, my own head ringing like a goddamn church bell from the gun going off inches from my ear. I couldn't look away. Finally, I forced myself to turn and look where I was going so that I could hurry up and get the fuck out of there. As I started toward the entrance, I glanced back once more to give my dead friend one final glance and halted when I saw that he wasn't there. Jason's blood and brains were still splattered across the front of the toy box, so I assumed that meant that I hadn't imagined the whole thing, but the folding chair where he had been sitting was now void of his slumped, lifeless body. As I stood there, trying to figure out where Jason's corpse must have gone, a stream of stagnant spilling water splattered against the side of my face. I turned to see Jason's mostly headless body draped over one of the Exorcist game's mounted water guns. I'm not exactly thrilled to admit this, but it's true that I froze when I saw him, thinking that Jason had gone full undead zombie on me. But after almost a minute of me standing there waiting for him to make the next move, I finally realized that wasn't going to happen. What I was seeing was nothing more than a dead body lying on a mounted water gun, which meant that someone or something was out in the darkness, moving around an 160-pound corpse and propping it up on shit simply to fuck with me. This was the realization that finally sent me running. I was in my 91 Jeep Cherokee and halfway down the unpaved dirt road back to the highway when the Cherokee hit a bump and dislodged something from the undercarriage. I pulled over and started to get out so I could take a look at what it was when I finally realized I was once again looking at Jason's mangled body. Moving a grown man's corpse is one thing, but moving it and then wedging it up into a car's undercarriage in the same time it took me to get back to my car, that's crazy talk. I really don't want to give this part much thought because the truth of it is really kind of depressing. Real life Jason had been really depressed about the breakup with Gretchen, and I guess I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. So I went back home and started to write it all down, just as Jason knew I would. I got about this far when I was interrupted by a knock on the door to my apartment. I opened the door and saw there was a note taped to the outside. "There's a package for you in the lobby." It was around 11 p.m., and I was pretty sure the management at my complex had long since gone home for the evening, but I headed toward the lobby anyway out of sheer curiosity. I started down the steps leading to the first floor of my complex to see Jason's mutilated body leaning against a Coke machine at the bottom of the stairwell. Somehow, they'd found me. I sprinted back up the stairs, seeing everything in slow motion as I hurried inside my apartment and locked the door. A moment later, the knob began to rattle as someone tried to turn it from the outside. I was slowly backing away from the door when something big crashed through it, though it wasn't my front door. Rather, the inside wall of the toy box that suddenly buckled inward to reveal a similar set of headlights. Jason had crashed my Cherokee into the side of the toy box. I spent 25 seconds inside the Devil's Toy Box. That's how long it took for Jason to run my car into it. Thankfully, the Cherokee was still drivable afterwards, and we promptly got the fuck out of there. I dropped Erin off at her house, telling her I was sorry and there was nothing else I could do. Honestly, I don't know what she expected from me. This isn't supernatural. If your boyfriend is missing, you call the cops. I'm going home. Do I feel bad that I couldn't help her? Sure, but for what it's worth, we disabled the toy box and probably saved countless generations of dumb kids from making the same mistake as Troy. The bad news is that doing so has almost certainly scarred me for life. Even as I sit here days later, writing this all down for the second time, I'm still worried that it's not over. I'm worried that when I wake up tomorrow, it's going to be in front of that goddamn box. I don't know, that wasn't like scary, but it like gets into your head. It's such a good, I love everything that he writes. I'm a fangirl. I admit that to myself. It's just so interesting, you know? Like, there's so many layers of that, and I feel like there's absolutely no way that I could have like written that. It was so creative and so well done. And a lot of the like, basically every story that this guy writes, they can get really sick and disturbing. Like, I purposely avoided some of the more disturbing ones because there are ones that are really, really dark and really, really twisted. But I just love everything that he writes because at the end you kind of walk away feeling good about life in some way. Like, I don't know, that obviously was kind of an ominous ending. Like, you could wake up in front of the devil's toy box at any moment, and I'm sure that's like a very actual real life feeling that you would get if you had that kind of like mind fuckery of like constantly waking up like in a dream or in something that wasn't real. That's kind of like Inception, isn't it? Maybe this was like Inception as a horror story, maybe. I mean, Inception as a concept was kind of spooky, but who doesn't love, I love Ellen Page. Anyway, that's a story by one of my favorite horror authors. I really hope that you go check out his everything. I'll provide links to all of the stuff about him that I'm aware of. He does have a YouTube channel, but it's not that good. Everything else is great. Everything else is great. If you're watching this, everything you do is great. We could collab on YouTube because my videos probably aren't amazing either. Anyway, have a great day and I'll talk to you next time.